Hi, Chris. Good morning. I'm
Good
very happy
morning.
to have you here in the new grIP Venture Studio series, the issue of the month. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Happy to be talking about this.
Great. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and about the services that about in political risk that you just launched?
Yes, so my name's Chris Oates, and I've been a political risk analyst for more than a decade. And basically, political risk is forecasting and building scenarios of what might happen in politics and government and macroeconomics, and then what it means to like specific organizations. And usually, this happens with very long reports. So I remember I did one for the European Parliament that was over 100 pages, and obviously took like 6 months to do, and there was a relatively big budget. And there are a lot of companies out there who need political risk work, but don't want to at least start with that. They either don't have the budget for it, they don't necessarily know if they want to do it. And so I was thinking that there has to be a better way to at least get these people into the world of political risk. Let them at least know what they could have, what they don't need to have, so they're not, spending $50,000 on a report that's useless, but they're also not flying blind in a very volatile world. So I thought just to make it very, very simple, I would offer 30-minute consultations for $99 so that if you're, a startup, a small business, a big business, and you think you have political risk exposure, you think you should be doing something about it, but you don't want to commit, a 6 month time frame and tens of thousands of dollars, you can at least come in and I can give you advice about where to go next, or if it's the sort of thing where you don't need to worry about it and you can at least have your concerns allayed from that.
Excellent, Chris. That is so important. It's very valuable, and I'm very happy that you launched that service. Very quickly, I'm just going to introduce a little bit about grIP Venture and who we are. Basically, our core lies in creating a collaborative environment where talented individuals like yourself from diverse backgrounds come together to support one another. We operate as a decentralized accelerator. Professionals from various sectors contribute their great expertise and resources with people that might need it. So it's really nice to be opening this space, especially you're the first one here of this series, and I think it's a very important moment to do this. So let's get started. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Tell us a little bit about what are the key political risks that startups should monitor, especially in sectors like fintech and healthcare.
So one of the biggest one is the regulation in your area. So, if you're a biotech company, for example, changing biotech regulations from in the United States, Health and Human Services or the FDA, that will affect it. What the rules are that you have to follow. And so you definitely want to be aware of that because if you're in a space where, let's say, you're doing, I don't know, vaccine development, and it looks as if the Secretary of Health and Human Services is opposed to vaccines, like that is going to make it more difficult for you to do your business the way you thought you could have done it a year ago. The other area is any kind of legislation that might be passing that could help or hurt the funding environment. So again, if you're really early stage in, let's say you're in clean energy, knowing what is likely to happen with clean energy tax credits is a big deal, not only for the actual operation of your business. But if you're out trying to raise money right now, and we're recording this while the Senate is still discussing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, so when you're watching this might have already happened. But if you had a investor pitch today and you said we have this new technology, it's really good for low carbon energy, and part of the funding model you're relying on is a tax credit that might be gone by the time you actually have your product to market, the investor is going to be worried. And the investor is going to say, well, how are you sure that this tax credit will continue? Do you have a contingency plan for what happens if it's taken away? And not only is that going to hurt your business, but that uncertainty around it and that inability to answer that question would hurt your ability to raise that money because you can't really go to an investor and say, well, this would have been a great business under the Biden administration, and now we have no idea. You're probably not going to then get that big check that you need. And then the third thing that I think a lot of startups don't pay attention to, but it is really important, is the broader macroeconomic and geopolitical situation.
Absolutely.
This,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you're a company that is relying on supply chains in China, that might not be a good idea going forward. And you might want to be taking time today to, put factories in Mexico or Indonesia or Vietnam. But also, if you're a company that, let's say, is selling to, middle income consumers in emerging markets, you really need to know whether there's going to be a global recession and consumer spending is going to drop there. Again, it might not change the product you do, but the strategy that you're taking long term that builds that product and allows it to be profitable is hugely impacted by these things. And again, what I see in a lot of startups is everyone's just so focused on product market fit. You're focused on getting the technology right, getting the marketing right, that you often just take for granted the way the world is, which often is fine, but not necessarily. And there are places that are incredibly exposed to that overall political economic environment. And if you just take for granted that what it is today is going to be what it's going to be like in a couple of years, there's a very good chance that you're going to be a couple of years in, maybe with a lot of money on the line, and you're discover that, your supplier can no longer supply to you for the same price, or your company isn't legal anymore, or you can't work in the countries that you thought you were going to work in. So just being able to know that that's coming, be prepared for it. So if it happens, you can pivot quickly is a huge part of being not just a successful startup, but one that is not going to make you criminally liable for something that you didn't realize the law had just changed on.
Absolutely. You're right. That's very important. That's great. Also, can you provide some insights into how shifts in the US political climate affect startup funding opportunities and investors' confidence?
So, on the startup funding opportunities, certainly anything that's reliant on government funding, you have to look to DC and see where the cuts are. So, it looks, I mean, we don't know for sure because it's still pending, but it looks as if there's going to be big cuts to clean energy and there's going to be big increases in defense spending. So, if you're a clean energy company, that's obviously bad for you unless you can maybe get a defense grant for something. If you're building solar panels that are, maybe more modular and can be put on the roof of a car, maybe you want to design them to be put on the roof of a Humvee instead. That sort of thing where it's just a tweak, but it means that you can access funding that's still going to be available. I think for investors, that is obviously there as well, who your customer is going to be. But for them, it's also what's the overall environment, because if you're reliant on high net worth individuals who have let's say, a lot of their assets tied up in private equity, and you're going to them and you're starting the conversations with them, it might be of interest to you to know that private equity doesn't seem like there's going to be a big unlocking of deals in the near future, or will there be? Because if you think that there's going to be a lot of deal making happening, then maybe you go to those people, you get in there before everyone else, and you say, I know, you don't have the liquidity right now to invest, but I just want to have a coffee with you. And then when deals start to happen, they, might be willing to go to you first. Or if you think that that deal making is not going to happen, you don't focus on those people that you think may have money technically but aren't very liquid, and you go to maybe more institutional investors. You look at grant funding, you look at, bootstrapping or seed strapping or some other ways, because every decision you make about fundraising is time and effort that you're not going to get back. So if you spend 3 months pursuing a sector of the investment world that actually, for what's going on in DC or what's going on with the Federal Reserve, is not going to be available to you, you may have just wasted 3 months.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Just to wrap up, what strategies would you recommend for startups to mitigate that regulatory and political risks while scaling their businesses, especially here in the United States?
I mean, obviously, number one is to have a consultation with me. That's obviously number one. But I think, no, the
How can
most
they
important.
contact you?
Okay, Chris at legislata.com. You can go to legislata.com/political hyphen risk hyphen consulting.
Excellent.
And you can just book it right there and you just grab a spot on my calendar. So we want to make it as easy as possible to do that. But the
Perfect.
most important thing, even if you do that or not, one is to actually think about this stuff. The biggest thing that people don't do with political risk is even recognize that it exists. So if you're at a startup, let's say you're at a biotech company, and yes, you are focused entirely on developing, the drug through all the trials and getting the technical stuff right. And that should be 99% of your job. but maybe that 1%, have a meeting once a month with your team and say, who's been following the news, what's been going on at HHS, what do we need to be worried about? Will RFK Jr. still be there by the time we're ready to, have real clinical trials? Does it look like he's going to be out soon and we should be thinking about what someone else is doing? Do we need to have our trials elsewhere? Should we start planning for that, making connections with maybe partners in Europe? So just having that like 30 minutes once a month where you get around and you talk about this stuff is extraordinarily helpful because generally speaking, no one person at your company is going to have all the answers, but collectively you might have enough of the questions that you can then start to think, if this happens, what do we do? Should we plan for that? Should we like actually start, having calls with people to build a partnership overseas? Do we need to maybe set some cash aside in case that happens? Do we need to do nothing in the moment, but just make sure that we keep having these monthly meetings? Of course, you can also always hire someone who is a political risk consultant to come in and do a more detailed report for you, build scenarios. You can run through a simulation of things, which I have often found are not only helpful for the product they do, but the actual process of doing that can be very helpful. But the most important thing is just to recognize that you are exposed to political risk, even if you don't think you are. Trust me, you are. There are a lot of companies with operations in Russia that didn't realize how exposed they were to political risk in 2022.
Wow,
And now
great
we're finding
example.
those operations nationalized or gone. So recognize that you're exposed. Take 30 minutes just in the next couple weeks, like set a time, say we're going to talk about political risk. And if you think there are enough questions that have been raised by the people around your team that you don't know the answers to, but might be important, doesn't mean they are important, doesn't mean they're going to sink your business, but just merits further investigation. That's, I think, when you reach out to a political risk consultant. That could be me, that could be someone at Eurasia Group, Horizon Engage, Oxford Analytica. There's a lot of great firms in the space, and just start that conversation because it's a bit like buying insurance. You hope you don't ever need it, but you also don't want to not have it.
Absolutely. That's a great symbol. Yeah, exactly. Okay, Chris, that's amazing. So thank you very much for your time. I'll post your info here with this webinar series as well. And also, I'd like to remind everyone here at grIP, we can give you professional advisory services in life sciences, biotech, fintech, government, business strategies and operations, marketing, and much more. So I'm very happy to have you here, Chris. Thank you. And I hope that people really understand the importance of contacting you very soon.
Thank you. I hope they do. Have a
Okay.
great one.
Thanks, Chris. Bye bye.